So he left the country at 8, and a major story about his mental fitness dropped at 9. Tonight, President Biden is abroad, and the Wall Street Journal raises questions about if he mentally has it or not. Plus, Donald Trump, did he just reveal a potential theme for his second term? How he hints at prosecuting the First Lady as a form of revenge. And then there's this.
I got a chance to meet with both sides today, and it feels really good.
What brought 50 Cent up to Capitol Hill earlier today? Plus, the NFL staring down a major antitrust lawsuit that could change how much you pay to watch football. Come on in. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. And hello from Washington, I'm Blake Berman. Top of the news here on The Hill this evening. President Biden is in France tonight, ahead of tomorrow's 80th anniversary of one of the most heroic moments in American history, D-Day. Now, it is likely to be the last major commemoration of some of the bravest Americans this country has ever known, who landed on the beaches of Normandy, France in World War II on June 6, 1944. The White House says the president will stress how those men, quote, put the country ahead of themselves. Back here at home, the president's family coming under scrutiny tonight from House Republicans. The Republican heads of 3 House committees announcing today they have sent criminal referrals to the Department of Justice as they believe President Biden's son, Hunter, and his brother, James, should be charged with making false statements to Congress. The timing, of course, comes just after Donald Trump was found guilty in New York last week. But first tonight, we know that President Biden is in his 80s. We know many have real questions about whether he has the wherewithal or not to serve another 4 years. But was today the right time for this? Here was the main story in the Wall Street Journal today, which dropped, by the way, roughly an hour after Air Force One left the United States for Europe. Quote, behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. The article details a president who, in his private interactions with lawmakers, has, quote, good moments and bad ones. The White House pushed back today, saying the only on-the-record critic is the former top Republican here in Washington, the former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Now, if President Biden wins re-election, he would be 82 and finish his term at 86. All of this unprecedented. Donald Trump, by the way, just 3 years younger, but the polls overwhelmingly show greater concern for the president's mental fitness. For example, a recent survey shows that 73%, according to the New York Times, believe that President Biden is too old to be an effective president. Hanging out with us today here on The Hill, Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. Kurt Bardella is a Democratic strategist, NewsNation contributor as well. And Lauren Wright, the professor, Princeton University political scientist. Hello to you all. Nice to have you in. That story from the Wall Street Journal today. The president gets on Air Force One, starts to fly, bang. An article that could have been published, Chris, at any point in time, you could argue, and they dropped the article of, maybe he's not mentally fit to serve. What about them doing that as the president heads overseas to commemorate D-Day?
Yeah, the Journal's been laying the wood to both of these candidates a good bit of late, and good on them. They whacked Trump hard with the full backstory on the Stormy Daniels stuff. Laid out all their good reporting on that. And then just as that one was settling in and they were taking their victory lap there, they did this one on Biden. Look, Democrats have said for a long time, oh, behind closed doors. Oh, behind closed doors, though. But behind closed doors, Joe Biden's actually great and is really impressive. And so they were sort of begging for this to eventually hit, that somebody would say, OK, let's do our best. Now, it's also true that you mentioned Kevin McCarthy's the only named person. Yep. And then there's an allusion to Mike Johnson, the current speaker. And look, I don't know. The truth for Biden, he is old. Mm-hmm. People know he's old. 82.
Or would be 82.
He seems old. And it is probably true that most Americans have the experience of knowing someone in their family, someone they've worked with, a neighbor, whomever, that is old and is good at doing stuff, but also from time to time has their bad moments. I'm sure that's true of Joe Biden, too.
You take any issue with them doing this as he's on Air Force One headed overseas?
You know, it's interesting because this obviously comes as Joe Biden is going overseas. It's not just that he's going overseas to commemorate this very historical day, but he's going to be seeing world leaders. This impacts his reputation in front of these world leaders. And, you know, I'm sure they're reading it. So that's obviously a point of nervousness for the White House. But what I thought was interesting, too, was, and this isn't necessarily surprising either, there were a number of Democratic senators that spoke and lawmakers that spoke for this article. But we know the Biden campaign was very much in touch with them. So it shows that the Biden campaign knows this is an issue. They are very much prepared. But going forward, look, I don't think the talk about the president's age is going to die down. It's an issue. And it's an issue that Donald Trump also shares. It might be perceived differently, but they're both old.
Was this the article you were dreading?
No, because it's an article that is based on one person on the record who his own conference called a liar. You can't trust Kevin McCarthy. That's why they threw him out. It's journalistic malpractice to base an article about the mental capacity and fitness of the commander-in-chief on the word of a known liar, and the rest complete on the off-the-record background commentary. And oh, by the way, why was it that the Journal omitted on-the-record quotes from people like Nancy Pelosi, from Democrats who spoke to the reporter on the record? None of those quotes made it into the story, conveniently enough.
It had 45 sources.
Who,
you think
what are
those
their
are
names?
Made up?
I don't know. Who are they?
Well,
what?
You know,
if you're going to question the president's capacity,
apply the same standard
put your name on
that
it, or shut the hell
Democrats
up.
did during the Trump administration when they
we're going to go that because of this and that.
No, I want to be consistent. I want to be consistent, and I want to know if you actually don't think this is problematic, that he can't name
I think it's
world
problematic
leaders
when a national newspaper uses their front page to put something like that out there, and they can't verify it with anyone but a known liar.
And so is your issue the content or the timing, or both?
Both.
The timing? You think it's the press's job?
You take any issue with it?
I don't think there's.
Why not wait till
I don't
Monday
think
to
it's
drop
not
the
the
story? Why wait till he's
responsibility
on
of
an
the
airplane?
press to protect a president's reputation.
They're not doing that,
he does
clearly.
something important every single day. He's the leader of the United States of America, and 45 sources takes a while to cultivate, and this is clearly an issue voters care very much about.
My favorite line in the piece was, they said, for much of his career, Biden enjoyed a reputation on Capitol Hill for being a master negotiator of legislative deals, known for his detailed knowledge of issues and insights into either side's needs. No, that was never Joe Biden's reputation. Joe Biden his reputation was as a blowhard, a glad hand, a guy who was not a master of facts and all of these things. So we have to always remember with all of this stuff, Joe Biden was always kind of a rhetorical mess and always kind of this, even before people had questions about his age. So that's a pre-existing condition.
The article also says Trump has some of the same issues. I think it's actually very even-handed.
All right, well,
I'll leave it there.
Today, the First Lady Jill Biden made a surprise visit to Hunter Biden's federal gun charge trial for the third day in a row. Instead of being in France today with President Biden, the First Lady will be leaving later this evening. And today in court, Hunter Biden's ex-wife and ex-girlfriend gave vivid personal testimony to Hunter's drug use. Another major witness is expected to take the stand at some point in time, James Biden, who, of course, is the brother of President Biden. Come on in, Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. Hello, Jesse. We have gone from the Trump case to this one. Look, this is messy for the first family, is it not? You've got the son, the brother, the First Lady there. What happened in court today?
So look, the prosecution, it's messy because you're dealing with very ugly subject matter. But today you're dealing with the prosecution trying to prove three things, right? They're trying to prove that Hunter Biden was a drug abuser, that he knew he was a drug abuser, and that he lied about it in order to get a gun and illegally possessed a gun. And so a lot of the testimony today was about him abusing drugs at that key time period of fall of 2018 when he purchased the gun. And we even heard from the store employee who said, I watched him sign that form. I told him to take his time. We learned that $150,000 of cash was, withdrawn from Hunter Biden's bank accounts. And when he was spending money, he was spending credit cards on other purchases. You have to imagine that the cash was used for those purchases of drugs. And so I tell you, it might be an unorthodox prosecution of Hunter Biden. I've always said that, it doesn't make sense that the way he's being prosecuted. But having said that, it is a relatively straightforward prosecution and an easy path for him to ultimately be convicted.
All right, some news moments ago, Jesse, out of the state of Georgia. The headline there, appeals court halts Trump's Georgia election case while appeal on Willis disqualification pending. Reading through all that, the case in Georgia for Donald Trump, that ain't happening anytime soon, is it?
Massive win for him. Massive. Why?
So?
Because remember, state cases were always a little bit tricky for him because the president cannot pardon him, right? President can't pardon for state crimes. So the state cases are always a worry for him. Now, this case is being paused with oral arguments on this issue. It's all about Fani Willis. Oral arguments set for October with a decision that could come anywhere before March 2025. And so all of the proceedings in this case, all of the motion hearings, all being paused. So even let's just say, Blake, that they have oral arguments in October and make a decision the next day. There's still this trial's not happening in November.
So let's just say he wins. Let's just say for sake of argument or sake of conversation, Donald Trump wins. And he's then in the White House January 20th of 2025.
Yep.
Is there a case going to the Supreme Court at that point in time about whether or not you can prosecute as a sitting president?
So first of all, the federal cases will go away, right? We know that.
Will go away. And this is a state case, so I wonder what happens at the state level.
We are still waiting for the Supreme Court to come back with a decision this summer about whether or not a president can be prosecuted. We'll see what happens there. But this Georgia case, that ain't happening. Okay. They're not going to prosecute a sitting president. And that's what are we going to wait till 2028? So that might go away as well. This is a massive win for Donald Trump after a big loss for him last week.
All right, Jesse Weber, we will see you later in the show. By the way, there is a big lawsuit out west right now involving the National Football League and how much you pay to watch games. Jesse will break that down for us later in the show. But before then and right now, is this all just the beginning? Former President Trump floating the idea of prosecuting his political opponents if reelected. He said so during an interview last evening.
It's a terrible precedent for our country. Does that mean the next president does it to them? That's really the question. It's a terrible, terrible path that they're leading us to. And it's very possible that it's going to happen to them.
Now, the Biden campaign responded today saying, quote, reeling and increasingly unhinged from his own felony convictions, Trump raising plans to jail his political opponents is just the latest proof that he will do anything to regain power, preserve his own freedom, and seek revenge on anyone who opposes him. So he's making these comments, Chris, and I couldn't help but think to myself, I know it's not likely, according to the legal experts, but he could still go to prison in New York. And if he does, and he's making those comments there, then what happens?
Yeah, look, Donald Trump did try to prosecute the people, his political enemies, when he was president. He ran on locking Hillary Clinton up.
And now he's backing away from that term.
Well, he claimed he didn't, right? He did. But, you know, the reality is we see in other people the deficits that we know are in ourselves, right? So Donald Trump assumes that other people are like him. And that the reason that he's being prosecuted is that Joe Biden is like him and thinking like him. But this is definitely how Donald Trump thinks, right? Which is, I'm going to punish the people who tried to hurt me. The reality for Republicans, it will not go away, which is it's complicating to have your nominee be a felon. There are upsides, there are silver linings. It helps with some people, Yes, all true. But at the end, you don't want to nominate a felon. It should be uncontroversial to say that it would be better for Republicans to not have a felon as their nominee.
So when an independent comes up to you or someone says, why should I support Donald Trump if he's going to do this, you would tell them what?
I can't defend it. I mean, I think it's really irresponsible. It's his election to lose right now if you look at the polling averages in the swing states. And so he should be hammering Biden on policy every single day. But he can't give up the personal stuff. He, lost an election and tried to stay in office. And these are the reasons the election will not go his way if he continues with this message.
It's also kind of ironic. I mean, I understand this is Trump fighting back, that this is deeply personal for him. But after his conviction, you saw his supporters in the media, his political supporters, go out and talk about the dangers of people prosecuting their political opponents, saying this is Democrats prosecuting Donald Trump, making that link. So it's just ironic to hear Donald Trump kind of use this to fight back.
Is this now on the checklist or the list for debate prep, Mr. President, no matter what the question is? Circle back to this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the Republican nightmare right now. Any interview that Donald Trump does, coming out of television should be about Trump hammering Joe Biden on the economy. We have a new DDHQ poll that we're going to talk about having horrible numbers for Joe Biden on the economy. And yet having that advantage, the headline coming out is Trump wants to use the Justice Department when he takes over to lock up his political enemies. That's how you lose an election that you should win.
I saw you nod your head when he said nightmare. Did you take any exception to that?
Well, I mean, if the Republican nightmare is winning the election, they are winning right now. So we should bear that in mind. But one thing that I don't want to gloss over is we've talked about it before. Hunter Biden is astonishingly selfish. The extraordinary selfishness, the solipsistic selfishness of Hunter Biden to drag his stepmother to court to stand with him. He should have pleaded guilty to whatever he could have pleaded guilty long ago. The fact that a clean narrative for Democrats, which is Donald Trump is a criminal, is complicated now because Hunter Biden is trying to make the case that he didn't think that he was an addict while he was an addict and could buy this gun. And we have to hear about the crack pipe, and we have to hear about his romantic relationship with his deceased brother's wife and all of that stuff. Like it's gross.
By the way, the one time that President Biden has gone after Donald Trump for being a quote unquote convicted felon was behind closed doors at a private fundraiser, and it is probably for that very reason there. All right, coming up here on the Hill, the first GOP primaries are held since Donald Trump's conviction on 34 felony charges. So are voters sticking with him? Or are they throwing their support behind someone else? Mick Mulvaney joins us in about 15 minutes. What happened in Montana and New Mexico last night, I found interesting, was texting a little back and forth with Mick today about it. On the other side of the break, you are breaking down those poll numbers that Kurt was referring to.
Oh, we got primo stuff. We got the DDHQ tracking polls. We're going to talk about how people feel about the economy. We're going to talk about some movement for RFK Jr. and who he's affecting in the race. It's good stuff.
You're watching The Hill here on News Nation. Back in a few. Here to The Hill on News Nation. So we see time and time again in the polls, or if you've just been to the grocery store recently, you know that the economy and inflation are the top issues in this election. The Biden administration has tried to shape part of its message by pointing to job growth. And they do have a story to tell. Every single month of President Biden's tenure, the U.S. economy has added jobs. For example, more than 4.5 million jobs were created in 2022, another 3 million last year. But what happens if the administration may no longer be able to tell that very story? Today, the payroll processing company ADP reported companies in May slowed down on hiring. And the government survey that tracks job openings ticked down to roughly 8 million. That is the lowest level since February 2021. By the way, last month's jobs number was the second lowest during the Biden administration. And on Friday, a new jobs report will be unveiled. That, by the way, brings us to new polling from our partners at Decision Desk HQ on how voters are looking at the state of the economy. And Steyerwalt is here to break it all down. Chris?
You want that I should break it down for you over here? I'm ready to break it down for you. Okay, here's the top line. Inflation concern. And why do we love this DDHQ poll so much? We love it because we like longitudinal trackers that tell us with consistency over time how voters feel about something. You will not be surprised to see that inflation has been a matter of high concern for the entirety of the past year. But I want you to focus closely on those last 4 dots at the end, those last 4 surveys, where you see things were looking a little better at the end of last year. People were starting to feel better. And then, bloop, this year ticks back up, and this survey says it stays exactly the same. As presidents in the 1960s, 1970s can tell you, inflation is a killer. It is an absolute killer for your hopes. What's the good news for Joe Biden? Good news for Joe Biden is that this poll shows some improvement. And this is how people feel about their own finances personally. Do they think they're better off or worse off or about the same? And you can see this gradual climb down on the red line and this gradual small increase in the green line. So that's the delta. People are very concerned about inflation, but there is some improvement in how they feel. And remember, we've talked about it many times before, how voters feel at the end of the first half of the year, at the end of the second quarter, is how pretty much they're going to feel on Election Day. So if they're not feeling better by the end of June, this is the condition that Biden has to go to vote with, and that's tough. Now, the other side of this, of course, is, well, not that. The other side of this is Biden is doing the first rematch since 1956. So some of the rules don't apply, right? Because Donald Trump is as unpopular or more so sometimes than Joe Biden is. So it's not exactly like that. And a lot of people are going to be frustrated and tuned out. Now you can show them that fabulous graphic with Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s face on it. And you see there. Okay, so this is interesting. And in this poll, we look at who are the people in the neighborhood who have the best opinions of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy got 36% favorables among Republicans compared to 30% for Democrats. Much more popular among Republicans. Younger voters, that was his best demographic section, was among younger voters, not nostalgia boomers. No, but younger voters. And among ethnic groups, single largest bloc was with Hispanic voters. Now, this ties into something else that we're starting to see, which is some slippage for Trump among that group of younger voters and non-white voters. And we're going to look at that more this weekend. We're going to keep talking about that. But I'll just say this. Joe Biden is right to be concerned about these loosely attached voters, these younger voters and non-white voters that don't have strong party loyalty. But he can be happy to know that Donald Trump doesn't get a clean shot at him. He's competing with RFK Jr.
All right, Steyerwalt breaks it down. There is still much more ahead here on the Hill. You might know the famous song In the Club. Well, today he was in the Capitol.
Bottle full of bub.
Yep. What brought 50 Cent to Washington today? But first, on the other side of the break, that was, I can't believe you. Could you have finished that sentence, Mulvaney?
No, I'm still looking up solipsistic. I didn't know.
When Chris dropped solipsistic, I didn't know what that word meant either.
When you're riding on dubs, you don't want to be solipsistic.
That is Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House Chief of Staff, NewsNation contributor, joins us on the other side of the break. What to make of some election results from last night, and what Mick thinks needs to happen in Ukraine. Mick joins us on the side of the break. You're watching The Hill. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. So we have been awaiting the first batch of polls to see how voters may or may not be reacting to Donald Trump's guilty verdict. But did we just get an actual poll in the form of a primary last night? 91% of Montana Republicans voted for Donald Trump in its primary, with 9% saying they have no preference. And in the state of New Mexico, Trump pulled in roughly 85%, with the rest of the votes going to candidates who were in the primary but dropped out. For example, about 9% to Nikki Haley. Now, for context, though, in 2020, when he was the incumbent, Trump pulled 91% of the vote in that primary. Now, there have been real questions, as you might know, about Republican Party support for Trump, as Haley was racking up votes and delegates while she was no longer a candidate. So, is this a sign that Trump is consolidating support among Republicans after his guilty verdict? Or does it show that he still has a base to shore up? You saw him there for a moment. Time now for Hot Mike with Mick. The former congressman, budget director, White House chief of staff, tells us what he's hearing, what he's thinking. Hello, Mulvaney. What about that last night? Because a primary is, in essence, a real poll, right? Folks had to actually vote last night, and Trump's numbers were higher than pre-conviction in a lot of these states. So is that shoring up support or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. I'm looking at an entirely different number. You could look at it and say that Donald Trump only won, lost 15%. He only won 85. Is that good for him? Is that bad for him? It's a little bit better than he was doing before the trial, et cetera. That's not what I'm looking at. Keep in mind, Joe Biden only got 84% of his numbers, I think, of his voters yesterday in New Mexico. It's the turnout. I'm looking more closely at New Mexico than in Montana because it's closer to being a swing state. It's probably a Democrat state. Right. The turnout was abysmal. The turnout was absolutely abysmal. It's down 41% in the Republican primary from just 4 years ago. Now, ordinarily, people say, well,
so what does that
Donald
tell
Trump doesn't have any real competition this year, so people aren't voting. He didn't really have any competition in 2020 either. But even worse, the Democrat turnout is down 48% from 4 years ago. It feels like both candidates might have sort of an energy problem, that their folks are simply not as fired up about voting as they were 4 years ago. And that could make for some big changes as we go into the last 5 months of the campaign.
I know you're looking at that number, Mick, but what about the idea of Nikki Haley was gaining a lot of support, like somewhere around 20% in a lot of these states, and she didn't get that last night. So have some folks come home? I get your point on turnout. Do you think some folks have come home for the Republican Party or not necessarily yet?
Yeah, it's certainly moving in the right direction for Trump, right? 85 is better than 80 is better than 75, so he's trending in the right direction. But when you're down 40%, you got to wonder, did the people that not show up, are they going to vote for Trump? Is that who didn't show up last night in New Mexico? Or is it the folks who aren't going to vote for Trump that didn't show up last night in Mexico? Your data is just so much harder to determine. It's not as valuable data when the turnout is as low as it was in New Mexico and to a certain extent in Montana yesterday.
Around the table, real quick takeaways from last night.
Well, we had a primary in New Jersey on Tuesday, and Haley, Christie, and none of the above got 15%. And it's not going to make a difference. We're not important voters, but those people have no home right now.
I think if he's making any inroads because of the conviction, some Republicans might be coming home. I think things like he said last night on TV about using the office to go after political enemies will send those people running back towards the Nikki Haley side of the party.
Yeah, and I think still that Haley's getting a ghost, the ghost vote, even though she's still getting it. It's still interesting, and it could be a warning sign for Trump.
All right. Meantime, now Ukraine is now saying it is using United States weapons known as HIMARS. Those are the high mobility artillery rocket systems to strike inside Russia. The strikes come after President Biden gave Ukraine the green light last week.
Is to allow the Ukrainians to defend themselves from a changing battlefield where Russia has rolled military equipment right up to the Russian border. It is Vladimir Putin that has continually escalated this conflict over and over again, including by these latest actions, and we think this is an appropriate response.
All right, Mick, your new column in The Hill looks at the question we have been wondering for months now, many, many months. Here's the headline, or here's the title. How does the war in Ukraine end? And Mick, one of the things that I found fascinating about your piece was you didn't randomly decide to write this. You've been traveling abroad. You were in Europe speaking to folks, and you said there was basically a central theme that sort of caught you a bit by surprise.
Yeah, the last time I was over there, everybody wanted to talk about funding, and now that we've taken care of the funding, we actually had a chance to talk about possible outcomes. Not a single person I talked to, and I was in 3 or 4 different countries talking to folks on the left and the right of all different political persuasions and backgrounds, not a single one of them suggested that the Ukrainians could actually throw the Russians entirely out of Ukraine, that they were almost entirely sort of coalescing around this idea that there'd be a cessation of hostilities and Russia would keep part of Donbass and Donetsk, that's in eastern Ukraine, certainly keep the Crimea, maybe keep a corridor between the two. Or there's a couple folks who suggested Russia might win outright, and there's a couple folks who were worried about escalation. But nobody seemed to contend that Ukraine, even with Western military support, had the ability to kick Russia out. And I wonder if that's what the folks in Europe are saying. Why aren't we having that discussion in this country right now? How do we see the war in Ukraine ending? Because right now, it looks like the possibilities are what you said. Russia keeps some. Russia overruns the whole country, escalation, or a forever war. And many of those are really bad, but the least bad seems to be a cessation of hostilities with Russia keeping part of Ukraine.
Excuse me. So President Biden, Mick, gave an interview to Time magazine that was released yesterday. Here's part of it. The reporter asks the president, quote, "So what is the end game, though, in Ukraine, and what does peace look like there?" The president says, "Peace looks like making sure Russia never, 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 never occupies Ukraine." That's sort of the opposite of what you just laid out.
That's the talking point, right? That's what you're supposed to say. That's what you're supposed to say when you drive somebody to the negotiating table. No one has been able to lay out for me in this country or overseas how that happens without Western military men and women on the ground in Ukraine fighting the Russians, and that means escalation. This is a debate. Look, here was my point of writing the piece. We talked about funding for so long because it drug out for so long. We stopped talking about what's the plan, what's the long-term plan in Ukraine, and I think we need to start having that debate again in this country.
Could we have that debate right now, responsibly?
It's funny what Mick says. I just went all the way around the world in the past week.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know whether you know this, I'm pretty patriotic. Mm-hmm. When asked about my political leanings, I do point out that I am pro-American. And to watch and talking to people around the world, hearing what they had to say, to have one of our candidates for president convicted on 34 criminal charges, and to have the incumbent president very much seen as an uncertainty in his leadership on issues like Ukraine. It pained me. I didn't know that it would hit the way that it did, but for foreigners looking at the United States and looking at the pitiful condition of our once great parties, it hurt to see it from overseas.
Mick, I'll give you the last word here.
I'd be curious to know what Chris thinks that means. How does the war end? This is the conversation I think we're not having in this country because, we win and they lose, which is a very Reagan-esque thing. We're going to be talking about Ron Reagan on the network over the weekend. Is that really the plan here? And if that's the plan, how are we going to implement it? Because I don't think that's the outcome here.
The way we got out of Vietnam was you're exactly right, Mick, which is, how do we get out of Vietnam? Richard, linebacker 2, we started bombing the bejesus out of North Vietnam to force them to the negotiating table to do it. And I don't know that the world or the United States is ready for a large-scale escalation against a nuclear power.
All right, that was Hot Mike with Mick Mulvaney. Interesting article up on thehill.com. If you want to read Mick's piece, I recommend it, and it is there. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Bye.
You got it. Bye-bye. All right, meantime, a surprise guest up on Capitol Hill today. Curtis Jackson, of course known as the musician 50 Cent, meeting with lawmakers today as part of his campaign to increase black representation in the liquor industry and really a focus on entrepreneurship. A 2022 study, for example, found that just 2% of executives in that industry are black. He explained to reporters why he came here to town to speak with lawmakers.
This is really exciting for me to be here. I got a chance to meet with both sides today, and it feels really good. Like, they don't agree. They don't agree on a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? So to get them to agree on seeing me was an accomplishment in itself.
There you go. 50 Cent up on the Hill today. All right, still to come here on the Hill. 387 bets, one major league player banned for life. Yet another athlete and league caught up in a betting scandal. Is it time for Congress to get involved? Not just this one baseball player. You've had someone from the NBA banned. One of the biggest megastars in all the world was interviewed by the feds recently. So is Congress going to do something about it? The head of the gaming caucus joins us live. Congresswoman Dina Titus on the other side of the break. You're watching The Hill. 1989, the Major League Baseball has banned a player for life as punishment for betting on the game. Now, this is just the latest in a series of sports betting scandals, and it is not just baseball. The NBA and NFL have also recently dealt with their own controversies. The NBA just recently banned a player for life, and of course, Major League Baseball, as you know, Shohei Ohtani was sort of mixed up with some stuff and interviewed by the feds. He was cleared, though. Come on in, the co-chair of the Congressional Gaming Caucus, the Congresswoman from Nevada, Dina Titus, once again joining us live here on the Hill. Yes, there is a thing known as the Congressional Gaming Caucus here in Washington. You co-chair it. I wonder, Congresswoman, what you made of this, because now this is a pattern. The NBA banning someone, Major League Baseball banning someone, megastar having to speak with the feds. Are you guys going to do anything about this?
Well, you know, it's almost a year ago right now that I sent that first letter to all the leagues from all the different sports saying, what's your policy towards betting on your own games? How do you educate your players and your teams? How do you punish them? Is it all very transparent? And we got back a good response. And now you have seen over the course of the last year some of the leagues stepping up, especially baseball. So you are banned for life if you bet on your own team that's playing, but usually it's just a one-year ban if you're betting on the sport, but not your own team.
So last year when there were some issues, Congresswoman, here was your statement. You said, quote, when players get suspended and coaches get fired, that means the system is working. The goal, however, should be to stop these bets before they are placed. That's not happening, Congresswoman. So I wonder if you can stop it at all, if Congress can do anything, or if the status quo is just going to exist.
Well, you know, you don't have anything to really compare it to, because prior to this year, you don't know how much sports betting was going on by the team. So this may be a small amount, and we think it is, and we think transparency is a good thing. having Congress watching this and knowing that we're looking at it to be sure that the games are fair so people will feel confident when they bet on them, I think is an important step. Gaming doesn't need us to get engaged, but if these scandals continue, there'll be those on the Hill who'll want to do that. I say let them police themselves, and if it doesn't work, then we step in, unless it's violating a federal law like the agent did.
I know it's sort of theoretical, Congresswoman, but is there a tipping point for you? Because it seems like drip, drip, drip. We are starting to learn more of this now because you're able to track it, right? Like you could bet on the phone and you can sort of link it all back. But is there going to be a tipping point for you?
Well, there probably will be, but in the meantime, you're right, we're able to track it. And there are these agencies that you can hire that follow these logarithms of betting and who can spot it more easily than they used to could. And I think that is also helpful. I have put out 5 points that I think the league should follow, whether it's being very clear, being transparent in what the penalties are, in educating. That's an important part of it, educating the team members and doing it maybe once a year and doing it in more than one language so they know what they're up against. And, you know, it's often those who make the least amount of money, like the minor leagues, who are more tempted to bet. So that's something else that should be looked at.
All right, Congresswoman Dina Titus, co-chair of the Gaming Caucus here in Washington. Thanks for joining us once again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Kurt, you said something yesterday that stuck with me, which was out of all the congressional hearings in this town over the last, decade plus, the biggest circus was the one with Major League Baseball and steroids. That is peanuts, seemingly. Like, yes, the integrity of Major League Baseball, and that was a massive story, no doubt about it. But that is peanuts compared to this stuff. And that's why I wanted to hear from the Congresswoman and wonder if that's sort of where we're getting, where we're going.
Because this speaks to the integrity of the game, and as well as how fans who are placing their bets in good faith,
but also like commerce, interstate commerce, and all those sorts of things.
And that's what the interesting question of what is the tipping point here.
Right.
I don't think that she actually knows what that answer is yet. No one knows until it gets so bad that they have to step in. I said this before on the show. Congress does two things really well: nothing and overreact.
So, is doing something an overreaction or no?
No, but I don't understand the mechanics of this. Has this just been a big trust me, I'm not doing it system until we have the technology now?
Yeah, basically.
And so are we going to see celebrity athletes dragged before congressional hearings? Is that something that's on the table?
That's the question I have, and what this ultimately looks like in a congressional hearing.
This is only a couple years old.
Yep.
And it's only since 2018 that this has been possible after a Supreme Court decision. And these leagues would be very circumspect about going into partnerships with liquor companies or tobacco companies, other vices that are legal, but they would be dubious about. They have gone whole hog in on these things, the tight partnerships on gambling. And then they have to turn around and say, but it's very, 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 very bad when you do it.
Right.
But we encourage everyone else to do it constantly.
DraftKings and FanDuel are basically co-sponsors of every sporting event that you see right now.
All right. Meantime, the NFL is facing some issues of its own, potentially. A lawsuit 9 years in the making, finally seeing its day inside of a courthouse in Los Angeles. The $21 billion class action lawsuit alleges America's most popular sports league violated antitrust laws and harmed consumers through its exclusive Sunday ticket package. Now, if the NFL loses, it could mean major changes to the way Americans watch football and essentially pay for it. Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor, come on back. What are you looking for here? This is a big one. I mean, the NFL is probably the most popular thing in this country, and there's a lot of money at stake here, is there not?
We're talking multi-billion-dollar lawsuit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so serious here. And the allegations, if we're talking about whether something is a monopoly, remember what the allegations are here. That the NFL entered into these agreements with distribution partners to create an illegal monopoly that if you wanted to watch out-of-market games, the only way you could do it was buying this very expensive Sunday ticket package, which cost Americans hundreds of thousands of dollars. But remember, hotels in like Las Vegas had to pay $120,000 to watch this. And so, the NFL will come back and say, look, the DirecTV, who is the exclusive distributor of it, they're the ones who set the prices. They're the ones who package these deals. And consumers have more of a benefit.
But is that what they're doing?
I'm
They're
sorry?
going to be doing this to each other? No, it's that guy. No, it's this one. And they're going to start pointing the finger sideways?
And remember, maybe, because DirecTV is not even now a part of this lawsuit. They're going through arbitration, but that can only go so far. And the NFL will say, we'll bring in an expert and say, consumers, they really weren't harmed. They got a benefit of having all these different games. But I'll tell you what, this is now a trial. This is moved forward, and it's going to be fascinating to see what happens.
All right, NewsNation legal contributor Jesse Weber. Jesse, thank you, sir.
Good seeing you.
You know, it's the antitrust stuff is fascinating, too, because it's what the NCAA is trying to fight for here in Washington. And it's something to just continue to watch here because you got this issue of gambling, the NCAA life support now with the NFL and all that. I don't know. Just it's so popular all across the country, all these things.
This is the ultimate Bermanian intersection. When we bring this business means
sports,
Berman,
and politics.
Berman means business, and then we bring in sports. This is like your true happy zone.
Hey, what was the biggest congressional hearing that you've ever seen?
Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa.
There you go. All right. We'll leave it there. Other side of the break, by the way, 80 days since D-Day. So what can we learn from the greatest generation? Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins me next. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation. Stay with us. All right, so before we say goodbye, a story that, of course, caught our eye. Tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Commemorations will honor the last surviving veterans when Americans and Allied troops landed on the beaches in northern France, in Normandy. There were 16 million Americans who served during World War II. Nearly 120,000 are still alive. Today on Morning in America, Leland Vittert spoke with a 99-year-old veteran who is in Normandy.
It didn't matter if you're optimistic or pessimistic. You had to do what had to be done. There was just no question about that.
Leland joins us live. It's so amazing to see these men. I mean, they're boys. They were, yeah. Now
17,
they're 98
18,
to 100
Let us all hope that at 99 years old,
he looks fantastic
and sharp as a tack.
Yeah.
And brought me to tears a couple of times. And I think you pointed out correctly the numbers.
Yeah.
And you learned and talked to your grandfathers probably about World War II. My grandfather was at Normandy. And the problem is we're losing the lessons of the greatest generation.